Should have tested volume, but how are we doing in terms of volume up there? Good? Great. Well, welcome to Middlesex Community College Visiting Writer Series with Daniel Tobin. And I am Tom Laughlin of the Creative Writing Program. I coordinate the program now, and this series is sponsored by the Creative Writing Program as well as the Office of Student Engagement. And want to thank Steve Rossi and his staff from the Office of Student Engagement, Dean of Liberal Arts Matthew Olson, English Department Chair Jill Keller, who all help out, and our communications interns, thank you for being here, Francois DeCostard and his staff. And Beth Noel helps with marketing. I want to thank her. So today we'll have a reading from Daniel Tobin, have question and answer period. We're going to raffle away some books, and he'll sign some books afterwards. I'm excited to have Daniel Tobin here. Daniel Tobin is a poet, a translator, essayist, scholar. He's the author of 8 books of poems: Where the World is Made, University Press of New England in 1999, Double Life, Louisiana State University in 2004, The Narrows, 4-Way Books in 2005, which was a featured book on Poetry Daily and a finalist for the Forward Magazine Poetry Book Award. Second Things in 2008, Belated Heavens in 2010, which won the 2011 Massachusetts Book Award in Poetry. The Net in 2014, From Nothing, which won the 2016 Julia Ward Howe Award by the American Authors Club. I'm sorry, the Boston Authors Club. And also from 4-Way Books, a number of them from 4-Way Books, Blood Labor in 2018, which was named the Best Book of Poems for 2018 by David Orr in the New York Times, as well as The Stone in the Air, his suite of versions translated from German of Paul Celan's poetry. That is published by Salmon Poetry in 2018. He has over 400 published poems and translations that have appeared in national and international journals and magazines such as Harvard Review, Poetry, Paris Review, The New Republic, the Times Literary Supplement, and Poetry Ireland Review, as well as being widely anthologized in the Loaf Anthology of American Poets, the Poetry of Rock and Roll, the Norton Introduction to Poetry, and elsewhere. He has published 2 collections of essays on Serious Earth, Orison Books in 2019, and Awake in America on Irish American Poetry, University of Notre Dame in 2011. He has published numerous essays on modern and contemporary poetry in journals in the United States and abroad. He has also edited 4 anthologies: The Book of Irish American Poetry from the 18th Century to the Present in 2017, University of Notre Dame Press; Light in the Hand, The Selected Poems of Lola Ridge in 2007; Poet's Work, Poet's Play, Essays on the Practice and the Art, University of Michigan Press in 2007; and To the Many Collected Early Works of Lola Ridge, which received a special commendation from the Poetry Society of UK and was named Best Book of Poems for 2018 by John McAuliffe in the Irish Times. His critical study, Passage to the Center, Imagination and the Sacred in the Poetry of Seamus Heaney, came out to wide praise in 1999 out of University of Kentucky Press. His many awards, in addition to those, including the Discovery the Nation Award, the Robert Penn Warren Award, the Greensboro Review Prize, the Robert Frost Fellowship, the Stephen J. Marengoff Award in Poetry, and Creative Writing Fellowships in Poetry from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. He received a BA from Iona College, an MFA in Creative Writing from Warren Wilson College, a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard University, and his PhD from University of Virginia. He teaches at Emerson College in Boston. Writing about his 2010 book, Belated Heavens, in the Antioch Review, poet, translator, and essayist Ned Balbo writes, Tobin's graceful movement between what's lost and the here and now, between earthy popular culture and metaphysical concerns, is characteristic of a poet fast becoming one of his generation's finest. About his 2018 book of poems, Blood Labors, the poet Barbara Ross has said, "Blood Labors is an ebullient ecclesiastical wonder, capturing more of creation, the uncreated, the recreated, than any dozen books on a poetry shelf. Tobin weaves a deep world time of Charles Olson with the Irish Catholic lyricism of Seamus Heaney, resulting in poems that as startling and essential as water. All told, Blood Labor dazzles with its brilliance." Please welcome Daniel Tobin.
That was a scary introduction, Tom. Really do appreciate that generous introduction. And I want to thank everybody for being here, and this is a really beautiful space. So thank you all for your welcome at MCC this afternoon. I'm going to start off by reading some poems from Blood Labors, which is the most recent book of poems. I have another one coming out in the fall. And I'll start off by reading the title poem. One of the poets that really influenced me early on, even in high school when I first started reading poetry. It seems that people start reading poetry in high school, or some people earlier. I started reading poetry in high school and got the strange bug of wanting to be one. Strange coming from my particular family, which had practically no books in the house. So this is called Blood Labors, and the poet it alludes to is John Donne, one of my favorite poets. So here goes. This cotton bud I swab under my tongue will crack the code of all the earth I am. The star-crossed chancers hiding in the blood appears from savanna grass, wavery in the body's woven niche of lattices. They walk in me as I walk in myself, which will end without a single passing through, life hammered to the future like a wall. Blood labors, Donne believed, to beget spirits, as though its chemistry were alchemical, breeding what transcends from what remains. Wind scatters dust and seeds around the scene. From little the tallest branches breach the sky, and that is where the birds shall make their home. I love it. I feel like I'm Allen Ginsberg. This next poem is called The Bone Flute, and in fact this is based on a story that I did read. The earliest musical instrument so far discovered is made out of the wing bone of a bird in the App Valley of Germany. They're probably finding and uncovering more such instruments in other parts of the world. So the impulse to song, the impulse to art goes very deep in the species, shall we say. There's a word I use in this poem, and it's an Irish word for a group of people getting together in a pub and having a musical time of it. It's called session, which you may have heard. You live in Lowell, and I'm sure there's an Irish pub in the town somewhere, right? The Bone Flute. Reedless, rimless, this woodwind owes its timbre to a wingspan, its quiet to millennia played like tenons for the planet's long riff. The man who notched this V to a mouth hole, drilled these zeros for keys, did so for the consort, the ones who huddle out of phase amidst the flint and sediment of their low-hung cave astride the Danube's bedded plains. From Ach to Bach, the one amplitude, single envelope of sound on the human frequency. So raise beers and bravos to this primeval session in honor of the goddess buxom and big sexed in the snug of the earth. Its stalactite timpani, mammoth tusk bassoons, its wind-chimed spear points. And to the unknown genius of this lithic whistle, his breath primed and pitched through the wing bone of a bird that might, just as deftly, with a beak fashioned by luck, or by a score more elegant, might have picked his own bones clean. The poems are going to get even more cheerful as we move along, perhaps. I want to read, I'll read one more from this book and then I'll move on to the net. The previous book. This is called Frond. And I think it's pretty straight up. There's a mention of Picasso at one point, and also Ella Fitzgerald, too. Well, I love Picasso's art. I'm not so sure I like his personality from what I know, but Ella Fitzgerald I'm good with all the way. Frond. It's really just about a wife and husband dancing. It could be on a card, tucked away somewhere, buried in a drawer under tools, the keys to doors left long behind, folded like a phone number into the black book of forgotten friends. The name of that plant, tropical lenient frond we keep by the window for light in our kitchen, each broadleaf when young untwisting from its woody sheaf like a scroll unfolding, patiently, out of itself, until a mask emerges, or what looks a mask, triangulate, emerald, shaped like a melting heart, mottled in bordered squares like a turtle's shell, each a trim of isinglass and lustrous depth of green. I look at the look of it and think La Demoiselle d'Avignon, each glance turned slightly otherwise, but still fixing the viewer. So when you walk away, you almost feel whatever it is beholding you from within the painting's flourishing of brush and pigment. Some distillation, maybe, of the model's only life, the extract the artist refines out of accidents. Quintessence would be the word, but Picasso, driven, used his mottos like Demoiselle, his brutal need, and went through them like rented beds, which renders the method of transcendence dubious, the simile wanton. Though nights when we turn up the jazz and sway to Ella singing Cole Porter, our small tropical splendor nods to the softening bounce of the room and appears to watch us giddily like the children we'll never have. And for the moment, everything we've done wrong feels fallen away as I dip you, comically, not ungracefully, to the end of the song. It's when the fluent leaf begins to yellow and dry, a scabrous skin, and it dips to the counter on its weakening stem that looks almost translucent, but elegant still in its slim arc, that I think of your mother on her last day, no longer able to hold her own head up, you holding it for her as you cradled her in your arms and softly patted what color she had left back into her face that was already, or nearly, the mask she would wear, freshened and pillowed in the parlor. Yes, I think now, there is no likeness. It just is exactly what it is, the unrecoverable downward tilt after the names have been called, as one of us will call to the other, while the one leaving lifts for the last time, lifts and stares. At what? At what? One wants to ask, but does not dare. I want to go read some little earlier poems from the net. And this first poem is called "And Now Nothing Will Be Restrained from Them," which is an allusion to the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. And there's some words here that are English words, but they're Old English words, and there are some words from other languages that come into the poem at one point or another. We know that many, many species die on a daily basis in the world. What we're probably maybe not quite as mindful of is that languages are dying. all the time in the world. So I suppose this is a kind of elegy for the loss of certain languages, but really the loss of languages that go out of the world when the people who speak them no longer speak them, or they themselves pass away. It's maybe, I don't know, from one perspective, one might view it as dated. This was written at a time when we were in one of our military escapades in the Middle East. So the poem makes an allusion to that. It still seems to me to be relevant regardless. So, and now nothing will be restrained from them. Life in our fortified huts brooks easy, though wind bears down, bears up under the heavens from work, with its formidable fire guttering earthward from the sky road again, a rocket's weird glare. The pixel hearth warms, coddled as we are, while behind us our assay with its hordes rudders on. The worm of us with our man price, word price, and all the far toffs, diminishing whomever the well-us, whomever the stranger. And we, strangers to the strangers in ourselves, shadowing us through the thickets of language, like the code of some lost primordial cousins watching their terminus stride across the tundra, fare forward with mongrel omnivorous tongues, adaptive, flagrant. To enchain syllables and to latch the wind are equally the undertakings of pride, Dr. Johnson wrote. Though to lash and enchain, or as Webster mused on his late shore, to enjoin some intercourse with tribes in Europe wholly unknown, keeps the dulcet prow buoyant on its course. Kayak, totem, chipmunk, moose, tote, banjo, juke, make their music in the native brand opera with schlepp, hex, hoodlum, shanty. Brogue speakers sport a shodden tongue, but it skips on and bling has become de facto. While far off, the Manchok slog into wastes chalk tar against the current. They're one of many words for go before they're gone. And the Nivik, with their multiple names for pairs, decouple from the planet's itinerant train. Come back, Pomo, with your computation by sticks, infinite sticks in the mind, your great woven creel, the last 10 of you subtracting Kali to none. In Siberia, the Tofa, just 30 of thousands left, still round their lives by the moon's nomadic light, hunting with dogs month, gathering birch bark month, and ride the castrated reindeer beyond the ice to join the Morovo, where the snake they call groundfish parses to a school that aggregates the Duma to a single body and moves Sakoto the way mourners in procession almost undulate in their grief. Always these grim goings, how the women keen over their bond, their broken Habibi, and the world becomes suddenly unspeakable. You can see it now in the shelled look of a girl cradling her fiancé back from war, his skull a fissure where the shrapnel shrieked its expletive. Can hear it in those primal stares without sound, huddled forms in a cave by the edge of a wood. Habibi, oh my beloved, oh my dear one. I'll go with a short poem. This is also about language, so there's something of a theme of language moving through today's reading. This is quite short. It's called As a Phrase Sewn into a Hair Shirt. For those of you who may not know what a hair shirt is, it's what a particularly faithful person might wear that would scratch and maybe bloody the skin under their normal shirt as a way of doing penance in the Middle Ages. So this is called As a Phrase Sewn into a Hair Shirt. by language, to ascend what is beyond all language, with silence to remark what in dark disturbs silence. Each sun renews the horizon's blank summa. With one screech, the jay infers its last word. Maybe that's the other side of language. The next poem is what they call a persona poem, and it's called parasitical. There's actually a condition where someone can be born and they're born with two heads, and one head, in order for the one of the twins to survive, that head needs to be removed. But there are some instances where the head that has to be removed in order for the one twin to survive actually exhibits some signs of consciousness. And so that's the epigraph to this poem in the voice of the head that's departing, shall we say. Despite having no lungs or its own body, the second head displays signs of independent consciousness. I think that needs to have its own voice. The first fiction is I'm talking to you at all, the more amorphous of my own Janus head, the God alive encompassing what has gone and what is coming, though which is hard to say. Did you say my own? I meant ours, my sister twin, the comelier countenance of our mirror linkage, orbital, locked, each turned away, one from the other, turned outward, each to our own horizon, inverted reflections on the knife edge of a pane. Don't be distracted by my lack of a body, the froth at my mouth, my eyes circling in their sockets like wobbling stars. I, too, keep counsel in our shared skull, the woven vessels of our thoughts, the mutual current of our separateness. Her limbs, her length are mine, wayward from me outwardly, and if you call me the one who follows, dependent, the monster in the blood, think of your own, the seamless bonds inside your boundaries hidden familiarly. Think how each breath lives off another's, so that in another world, another time, we two together, one would be divinity in human form. Holiest, a double sun, the crown of the temple's plenum, and I something more than a mask you cut free for love of the other, who of course will die without me. The visage in the bottom of the tray you'll bury to salve yourselves. The scar, the scald, the waste, the link, the lack, your secret face. I've been teaching odes lately in my forms class at Emerson, and I figured I'd read a small ode myself. This is called Small Ode on a Wave Function, and you know, when I wrote this poem a while back, the notion of the metaverse or the multi-universe theory that crops up in Marvel, not TV shows, but movies all the time now, wasn't quite as popular as it is. So this particular little ode takes its theme from the idea that in a wave function it splits into, and you can possibly have an infinite number of universes develop out of the one thing, and it's happening all the time supposedly. So this has a little epigraph from Michio Kaku, the great physicist, and it says, "The mind reels when one realizes that all possible worlds coexist with us. This means that the waves of each world vibrate at different frequencies and cannot interact anymore." This is called Small Ode on a Wave Function to a Daughter Not Born. On the bright other side of the wormhole, where the lives we might have lived live on, swirling droplets in night's entire sea, you're like a sea creature that walked the earth, unaccustomed stranger, until it chose a future of fins, a memory of song. How else should I summon you into my song, who never was, who never will be whole or partial to the world, this world we chose? The fin, the finger, and the face live on in bodies' coves, amenable as earth that buries and renews. Everywhere the sea flings itself against the shore, the great sea that widens intolerably. No song can reach you there, though your version of earth, too far even to say unbeing, black hole, I trust keeps and comforts, lush oblivion. Bright faces pass us in the world we chose. And on that theme, I'm going to read a poem called An Echo on the Narrows. The Narrows, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and so I grew up very close to the Narrows, right under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which I actually saw growing up when I was young. So this poem, as you may be able to hear, is a sonnet, but it's a kind of a strange double sonnet in that the end words of every line kind of redouble and form a second poem out of the first poem, and that constitutes the echo. So I'm going to read the sonnet, and then I'm going to read the echo. An echo on the narrows. What are you never to be but my own voice returning like light waves from outer space while the red shifting stars accelerate beyond eye shot in the all-freezing distance? Sometimes I think I see you through dark glass, plucked into being, and the dream consoles of infinite strings of far fields only separated like lives beheld at a glance. I want the world to whirl at my embrace. Or better, you are beside a shore yourself, your small hands reaching, though the winds are stiff, prizing shells between the foam and the currents. And I angle my lens for light to hold you in its sight until I am no one. Voice, space, accelerate distance. Glass consoles only at a glance. Brace yourself. Stiff currents hold no one. Does anybody know what a ghazal is? It's a wonderful Persian form, and I've written some of those. It's kind of built on discontinuity, but as it accumulates, it forms a kind of rich continuity. And the game is, you'll hear there's a certain kind of pattern of sound repeated through the couplets. And then technically, in a true ghazal, the poet is supposed to sign their own name into the last couplet, which I don't do in this one. I sign somebody else's name into the last couplet. This is called Late Bloomer. Something whispered, I wanted more of myself. That's how I turned into the fluor of myself. The lake, the ripples shimmer, that lilting face. I'll guzzle the infinite pour of myself. What is this flow I feel? Its course through soft bone, the current, the mother lode, the ore of myself? Fill me with all things, empty me completely. I winnow, and still am the store of myself. Imagine Earth, the stars, all space expanding and finding everywhere the core of myself. If soul's estate means a mansion's many rooms, then someday I will take a tour of myself. Do you think me insane, my hypocrite twin, a catatonic's stare, the whore of myself? Call me this, call me that, call me what you will. I surpass beyond words the lore of myself. Time blooms with space, and their sons all I am. I am forever the before of myself. Beauty is truth, truth beauty, beauty is truth. X to nth power is the shore of myself. Narcissus, the name a wind passing through wind. Now watch me step through the door of myself. I'm going to read a poem from the new book, and it's a local poem. Has anybody ever been on the Massachusetts Turnpike? Probably for many hours, some days. One thing you can do when you go on the Massachusetts Turnpike for many hours, you can actually, 1 second please. 1 second. Oh, wrong book. Sorry, here it comes. One thing you could do when you're on the Massachusetts Turnpike is try to think of what poem you might write while you're sitting there endlessly. This is called The Turnpike, and it has an allusion again to John Donne to help frame the reading. And this that allusion is an expansion like gold to airy thinness beat. Valediction forbidding morning. And this is addressed, I suppose, to the beloved. You away and me on the Peter Pan, heading home for my own required remove. I'm drawn by the window's broad reflection, the traffic passing along it like a nerve. An endless charge of cars inside the pane, the voltage of the reel. Though as they go sliding down its long ethereal sheen, where the solid world softens into flow, they take on the ghostly substance of a dream, or rather what we picture dreams to be, since when we're in them, they are what we seem, and cause us joy or pain as vividly as the lies we think we live between the lines that imprint us and we pass between. Here the world inverts. Shades materialize and cars speeding left expand a breach that transports into doubles on the right, and those in transport opposite condense their mirror selves in a second teeming flight, as if our light ship bus could break such bonds and matter shatter. Like all things physical, it's a conjure of parts and energies, a neverland of haunts inside the skull. Though saying so won't prevent this children's cries from jolting with their needful disturbance, or the aging woman across the aisle from leaning in her slackened, palpable face, comically, mildly, till the infant calms. If, as scientists say, we are like hurled stones, as bounded and bound dear by material, and if our minds resolve into a mist we thinly feel to be the actual, then who's to say the rock is not the air it hurtles through, observed from deeper in, not above? So you and I circuit there, firing the inexhaustible engine. So I'm going to read a couple more poems, and then we'll move to some questions, I guess. This first poem is called The Kingdom of God Is, and it's one of those poems where the title drives past the invisible stop sign at the end of the title into the first line. The kingdom of God is like this sapling oak, sprouting from what looks to be the knothole of a copper beech. The oak's leaves a child's squiggles, colored livid green in the dusk sun. The beech's bronzed doubloons weightless in the stillness in which they seem to float. the spreading elephantine height of it, a landmark now on this corner, dwarfing the homes, dwarfing the other trees. So many come down in the last storm, halting traffic, crushing porches, while from this sprawl a branch toppled to sidewalk, a thicket to be cleared, which makes me think where the sapling flourishes now is nothing but the hollow wound left by a limb gone long ago, and that, assuming it lives a while, this brief life risen unlikely out of abundance, it too will come to fall when the great thing falls. Okay. So the last poem I'm going to read is called La Cicada Familia, and it takes its inspiration from La Sagrada Familia, that great cathedral that's endlessly and wonderfully being built in Barcelona by Antonio Gaudí, who is the architect, and also by the fact of cicadas that we all know so well, and kind of draws a connection between, strangely, the two of them. I make a quick reference to the myth of Tithonus, which I think is clear just in the poem itself, but this is really, I suppose, a homage to Antonio Gaudí because of his great diligence and dedication to art. So for those of you in the creative writing program here, hopefully you'll take that over for your own work in some way. It's a little longer, so hold on. La Cicada Familia. Like an old Victrola, its needle stuck in the groove where the flamenco dancer patters her firecracker feet to the floor, machine gun maracas. So the cicada pays homage to its clattery muse, she who pitied the flight of Tithonus, withering eternally through his dog days, so the myth tells us, unable to die, his tymbals buckling to fashion's song, the shucked body transfigured with its losses, a wanton wending, come hither to the beloved. Wings like a window's beveled glass, the female slitting a twig's bark to lay its eggs so the nymph's newborn can drop, shimmering pink shower to the ground to feed on plant roots for the 5 instars before emerging, magic cicada, after 17 years, into imago, to sing its risen song again, dithering hum, dizzying ascension, like a mass exodus of souls from the earth. And what lifts the heart is another longing, Sagrada, to picture Gaudí laboring on the nave that would become his crypt, the temple accruing niche by niche in slow time, like a holy mountain, God's body in rock, a radiant parlante. The nudity of the beggar is seen through its rags, he would say, whose eyes, friends remarked, were piercing blue seas. Though he would engineer the spirit from the opulence of trash, crockery, bed springs, broken tiles, and toys, all found their place in habitations of the fabulous, improvisations, geometry, Montserrat's high womb, Tarragona's light, oven linings, needles, metal bands, shards. Nature, he felt, abhors the monochrome, so he daubed his surfaces with object trouvé, cameos and collage, unbuttressed ascent, grotto, diorama, carnival, and shrine, desiring to capture in his flares and folds the plastic reality of the spiritual world. And so behold the metamorphosis of turtle into forest, into catenary sky, snail and sunflower, a quickening of leaves, all things in trincadis, parabolic flight, the soul's promise in a liturgy of stone. In his last months, he slept among them, the uncompleted forms, the dreamt facades, and kept like clockwork his daily ritual, morning mass, angelus, late confession, prayer, while in between he hammered out his plans, a universe rising alluvial. God, my patron, is in no real hurry, on the luminous topocera of the Bay camp. So he walked the restive streets of the Ramblas, honing his vision to heal through material the nightmare of materialism, working like a minimalist of the monumental scale, seeking the equilibrium of earth and heaven. Cicada, Sagrada, La Sagrada Familia, with its numbers and symbols of creation's mosaic, its four facades for divinity, passion, judgment, resurrection, its 18 steeples spiraling inwardly like a nautilus, with its transept cross marking the infinite directions, with its excess and absence like the mystical body. When the train struck him that June day, 10 years before the Civil War, the anarchists would ransack his grave, burn his plans. No one recognized the great man bleeding on the ground, pants secured with safety pins, his shoulders swimming in his suit, a handful of nuts and raisins in his pocket. So they carried off the coppersmith's son, who would ride his donkey through Ruidan, a sickly boy, troublesome birth, and died like the homeless, broken among the poor, whom he loved, master of play and praise, genius whose art was a frozen music. So on his final day, in his unfinished templum, he closed his prince, a hush like a plain chant of folded wings, calling to his assistant, "My friend, we must come back early tomorrow, so together we can make more beautiful things." Thank you.
So, questions? Sure, whatever you want to be. Want to open it to questions for all, and reactions and responses. I'm going to try to start with, I guess, thinking about the ways that you bring together so many the minutia and the grittiness of and the unflinching look at the world and nature and human beings and the larger metaphysical and scientific and research. And I guess I'm wondering about your journeys, your theological studies and poetry, and I guess how you see that interplay, or is there a journey that you've been on that has woven those things together, your scholarship on other poets, Irish poets, others that influence your own style of writing? I don't know, there's lots.
No, thanks, Tom. That's kind of
a big question, I guess.
I grew up, and as I alluded to earlier in the reading, I grew up in a family without a lot of books, and they did have immortal poems of the American people, or the immortal poems of the British language, or something like that. I don't know how it got on the shelf that was filled mostly with Daniel Steele novels when there were books. But so I kind of picked into that when I was a kid, and for some reason I got the idea that I wanted to be a poet somewhere around the age of 15 or 16, I think, which is unheard of in my family. So I think it is a lifelong journey because, I've always been interested in metaphysical things pretty early on. I had that flirtation, right? Having grown up Catholic, with entering the church in a more intimate sort of way, which I did not pursue. But it seems to me that being alive, if we ask questions, then we're asking ultimate questions, as well as the basic questions of how do you make enough money to live your life and have a family and not starve to death and live well with others and all that. And those are all excellent and important and questions that you can't turn away from, but there are other questions about why anyway. Why all this? Why this scenario? This strange scenario on this strange planet. And so I've never been able to shake those questions, and consequently my own pursuit of knowledge, and Iona College it was called a blue-collar Roman school when I was there. Also sort of shaped or forged me, I think, the groundswell of my own being in the family I grew up with in Brooklyn, with larger questions that I just couldn't turn away from. And so I think my poems are kind of a marriage of my upbringing, my life, and what I read, and it's not simply a matter of a curiosity reading, it's a kind of reading that involves really life and death in the fullest sense of how we engage those large questions. Does that answer your question, Tom?
It does, yeah. I mean, there's no right, and I just think of From Nothing, that has all these voices and all these subject matters and all that stuff. So really interesting. More?
Good questions.
So I really love the sense of imagery. Like, I don't know, I was over here like trying to really hold it in because I was like I could see I could see that journey through your poems, and I'm really thinking about how do you combine research with your own work without it seeming like you're doing like a research essay. Like it just, you add feeling towards it. It's interesting. I want to know how to do it.
What's your name?
Tariq.
Tariq, that's a great question. And that's the question that is really the fundamental question, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have a formula for doing it, but I think it has something to do with finding a way to transform mere information. We are bombarded by information, right? All the time. We can't get away from information. So how is it that you can take a piece of information, it could be a theory of wave function or something like that, or it could be something that just happened in the news, or something you read, and how does it become part of the poem? I think it becomes part of the poem effectively, if it works, by you taking it into your life and finding a form, right, that allows it to be transformed from mere information. Information transformed into the poem, right? But there's no formula. I think that's a general idea, and you have to do it again in the next poem, right? So that doesn't guarantee you did it once or twice or 10 times, doesn't mean it's going to happen the 11th time. So it involves a certain degree of re-engaging, reinvention, and trying to get access to what's behind the event that binds us all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other folks? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello. So I was wondering, your feelings on constraints set for yourself in terms of writing and poetry. This is something that we were talking about I'm a creative writing student in the creative writing class, about applying constraints and how limiting yourself can be free in ways. Could you maybe talk about your feelings on that, your feelings on in those of?
Yeah, I think we have temperaments. Poets, certain poets are temperamentally inclined to being quite musical, and some poets in their drafting process do almost like an automatic writing, and they pour themselves out. I know my temperament. I'm very much an architect when it comes to poems, and I get a sense of the form. It's something intuitive in me. So I do think constraints are good in the sense that they can liberate you to discover. That said, sometimes you could clamp yourself if you hold too tirelessly onto an idea of what you want the poem to be. I think you have to listen really hard to the poem. What does the poem want from you as the poet, right? How is it calling out? And it's hard to sort out whether it's you imposing something or what that potential poem could be. But formally, I think, to work on form, even if you end up breaking the form or inclined to a more free verse kind of poetry, I think learning the traditions, multiple, not one tradition, the traditions of form, I think can only help to shape and make more supple the poems that you write. That's what I would say. Right. Those are great questions. Those great questions. Yeah.
I don't know in regards to my peers, but for myself, I find that I struggle with the concept of imagination. So, in terms to you, do you ever find that when you're, I guess, not have written anything or just getting started and have nothing written down, no idea what you're going to write about, that you have struggled with too much imagination, that there's too much in your mind, and you kind of tend to like discard different ideas, and then you come back to them later, or just too much in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this a while, so I've slowed down a bit in the last year or so, and I probably let things percolate longer than I used to, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in terms of the vastness of what's possible in the making of a poem, there's really no limits. So I think a poet does need to find the way in, find the limit. One thing that I think is true of shaping the imagination is to embrace the idea that a really effective poem in some way defamiliarizes the ordinary. In other words, it kind of breaks our expectations. It breaks our habitual way to see things. So we all buy, Hallmark cards. That's maybe too obvious, but they kind of ride on the habitual way of seeing things. But I think poets engage their imagination in a way that will surprise with the insight of seeing something that maybe we didn't think it was alike that other thing, but in fact, well, there's something alike to it. So that can be a way of, in a way, narrowing, right? Seizing on one thing, two things, three things that kind of might have a connection that is unexpected. That said, I will repeat myself, people work differently. William Butler Yeats, one of the great poets of the last 500 years, had his wife or had himself that worked automatic writing, which was all of this crazy wild stuff. Well, he had to shape that crazy wild stuff, right, into the poem. And what he said was his goal as a poet was to, quote, hammer my thoughts into unity. So, right, that's a workman-like thing to do, or a work person-like thing to do, right? So I think somewhere negotiating between the broad spectrum of what's possible and then getting to work is where it lies for anybody, whether you're just beginning or whether you've been doing it for 40 or 50 years, like me. Other folks? Either one, two.
Go ahead. I used to write a lot as a kid, and then I said might as well get back into it, doing creative writing and everything. And with myself, I get an idea, and then all of a sudden I get another idea, and then it just goes off on another tangent. Do you have any tips of how to keep focus, or do you find that when you're writing poetry, do you write one or multiple poems at a time, or you just stay on one?
I typically stay on one. I want to dive into it as much as possible and concentrate on it. I'm trying to think. That's my own obsessive compulsiveness. Tom alluded to some large project, this book From Nothing, which is actually part of a larger project. So I was working on those poems for the total thing I worked on for about 13 years, and I worked on other poems while I worked on the project. So in that sense, I had the big project that I worked on at the same time as I had little projects. So I think sorting that out in terms of time, you could do both, but I think I would never have the Stephen King thing. In one hand, he's writing one novel, in the other hand, he's writing another novel. That old joke about Stephen. I don't think I could do that. I have to concentrate.
Can I ask, actually, just in terms of related to that, you write essays, scholarship. Are those also, you're in the midst of an essay and you get distracted or strained with poetry, or Do they take you,
Yeah.
Are you juggling those things too?
I'm juggling. I tend to try and focus and get something done, though it might take a long time for the completion of a thing. I'll give you an example. Recently, I was very fortunate this fall to have a sabbatical. We love to get those. It's rare, but we love to get them when we get them. And I was concentrating. My intention was to write an essay. So that's what I did. I actually went and got an opportunity, got some money to go to England, and I went and focused. My goal was to focus and write a draft of the essay. While I was there, I worked on 4 poems. The poems came before the essay came, and then partially the essay came thereafter. That doesn't usually happen for me, but that's, I think, because of the sabbatical. I had time. I mean, I teach full time, and it's not a 5-3 load, but it's a 3-2 load, and it's, Tom is a very dedicated teacher, and I dedicate to my students too. So you try to fit things around all the stuff that you have to do, and you are not just by obligation of the job, but by obligation of who you are to give yourself to student work, right? So that's why I may only be concentrating on one thing at a time, because I don't usually have time for one thing or another thing. If I get one essay done in a semester, I feel like, wow, that was good.
Are there any things you do to help you concentrate while you're writing? Like music, or are there specials? Because I'm trying to figure out are there certain things you do that help you come up with ideas? Or, sorry if this isn't a good question.
No, it's a great question. That's kind of the original issue, isn't it? Where do you get ideas from? I get ideas. I like to leave myself open through my reading, but also it's not just reading. What's going on in my backyard is just as valid, right? I have a poem that meditates on squirrels. I didn't read it, but I do. And it actually got me thinking, it kind of got cross-referenced with some reading that I was doing a year or so before about the migrations of human beings from Africa and out. How that happened, I don't know. But to see, maybe it had to do with the fact that we as a species were hunter-gatherers, right? And what are squirrels? They're hunter-gatherers, right? They go up into they're looking for nuts and things, and they're putting them in store somewhere. So somehow those two things got crisscrossed in my brain. So I think try to keep what you see of the world fresh, right? And everything that you read or encounter is possible to have a new insight about. So I would say that would be it. I mean, a poem can be written about anything. I really believe that. It's just a matter of where the spark hits, and being open to the spark and being ready to go for it.
Yeah, because with me, it's usually an idea will just hit, and then I go and write it down right away.
Yeah,
and then I have trouble adding things after, because then I'm worried it'll start to sound too forced.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put limits on myself early. That would be one thing. I mean, it's all right to make mistakes. The great thing about writing poems is, right, you don't have to buy canvas to paint. You don't have to buy the paint. You don't have to buy a frame. All you need is a pen, technically. If you have a computer, great, but you don't need the computer. You need some paper and you need a pen or a pencil, and you can do it. And I actually thought about that when it came to the point in my life where I had to make a decision about, do I want to go into art? I used to love art. But I said, well, it's going to be a lot of money to buy all those canvases and to buy all that paint and to buy those frames someday and to get people in galleries to be interested, and that's a whole other thing. I got a piece of paper and I got a pen. I can do it myself, right? So that was big for me. So the great thing is you don't have to limit yourself. You can make mistakes. Making mistakes, it's great to make mistakes. That's how you get somewhere, right? No, the world's not going to fall apart if you write a bad line of poetry. You can cross it out and work on it and get that line better, or write another line. It's important to see that, right? The inner no is very hard to get rid of.
Yeah, I was working on that today with my piano playing. Like, I kept on thinking, oh, what this arrangement is no good, and I don't realize it because I don't look at it.
Yeah, no. You have to quiet the inner critic in order to get farther. That person has to back off over there. Behind me, Satan. Get behind me. Right.
Earlier you had said that when you go to write, it's intuitive. So when you're dealing with a topic that makes you uncomfortable,
Is there a topic that makes me feel uncomfortable?
well, when you get to a topic that makes you
Yeah.
uncomfortable,
Yeah,
how do you
is.
get through it?
I've had that experience more than one occasion, and the way I get through it is I'm a bit of a bull when it comes down to it. I think it helps to be a bull. Again, I just go for it. I go for it, and I don't worry if I'm uncomfortable. I don't worry really if the poem gets published, who will read it. As I'm working on it, I want it to be aesthetically achieved, regardless of what the subject matter is. So if it's not aesthetically achieved, it doesn't matter. Then it would matter to me that I hadn't accomplished what I wanted to accomplish if it was an uncomfortable subject. But I think you can write about uncomfortable subjects in a way that you do achieve some aesthetic significance out of them. I mean, we're probably past the confessional poetry stage, but there are still people who write out of their own personal experience. I do, and I think that's perfectly fair game to me. Yeah, but I think you have to. It's sort of similar to the last question. The inner the inner critic, the inner worrier. Who's going to see this? It's got to go behind it. It's got to go behind, I think. I mean, I didn't want my parents, to be honest, to see my first book. You know, there were some shaky poems in there. Or my third, for that matter. Some shaky poems in there. So, I mean, my biggest worry is, who in my family will read this early on? No one trounced me for it. No one disowned me in the long run. I do know somebody who was not a poet but wrote a memoir that they did face some, shall we say, blowback from the family because it was a memoir. You could always say, Mom, it's not really about you. It's a fictionalized character that just happens to have a lot of your characteristics.
I'm curious, and it's kind of a fun question. I know you've written a lot of poems and poetry. How do you determine which poems will fit in what book?
Great question.
Like, this poem will fit better in the first book than the third book, or?
Well, I can answer that, and I'll try to make it short. It took me a really long time to get my first book published, so I had a book already done and floating around when the second book was completed in terms. And then I did something because the first book was coming close, but wasn't making it into publication. So I did something where I kind of mixed up the poems, right? And that was a disaster because they really didn't fit together because I was trying to combine something that were really separate things. So I brought the one book back to the next one, to the original, and that eventually did get taken. I still had the first one floating around, but I kept on writing. So then I had like a third book that was pretty close to being finished. So I've always had the very problem that you have just asked the question about, which is since I have a surplus of poems, where do they all fit together? And so I had to make that, I still have to make that decision. I'm still facing that decision. In 2026, I'm going to have selected a new poems published. I'm very happy about that, but I have to decide what's going in there, right? Because it's not everything.
Yeah.
And then the new part is particularly challenging because which of those poems get in there? So what I do is, this is a great space right here, because when I'm ready to get a poem into some sort of book form, I take it out of the linear process and I spread it out in a big space, if I can find a big enough space. The space would be great. And I'd just be walking around it, and moving things around, and not trying to break my linear thinking so that I could see what's bouncing off of what. And when I can get that out, there's certain things, let's say you wrote 3 really substantially long poems, they're probably not all 3 going to go in that book because the book can't contain anything that big, right, necessarily. I wouldn't say absolutely, but not necessarily. So I think the issue is sort of doing some sort of physical thing to get out of your own head. Spread it out, put it on a wall, move things around, get it out of your linear sight so that you can see something that you didn't see necessarily before. I don't know who was first. 2? 1, 2?
Sure. Just going off of that last question, do you have like a particular order that you think of your poems being read in, or that like in terms of books, like is the reader like what is not what is your expectation for the reader, but like how do you view like the flow for your books?
Yeah, that's a great question too. What I hope it is that the second book is better than the first, and the third is better than the second, and that I'm progressing as a
poems
poet.
throughout each book.
Yeah,
Like
the poems inside each book?
Yeah, like through each book, are they meant to be read sort of in that order, or
Yeah.
does it matter to you? How do you feel it and read your own?
Well, I think in reading, giving readings and so forth, you pick poems out, but in my view, every book of poems has a shape that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so ideally, I work very hard on the movement of the poems in each book so that technically if somebody were to read from page 1 to page 50 or whatever it is, they would be able to determine an art that also encompasses variability and improvisation along the way, that there would be a shape to it. That's what I would say. Even though it's not necessarily linear or narrative, right? Did you have your hand?
Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, I see that you already have like a bibliography already. Not bibliography, but like a collection of books behind you.
Yeah.
I'm in a creative writing and publishing class right now with Professor Laughlin that he's running this semester. What would you say your journey was to getting published in terms of like putting your work out there first through magazines or any like local college papers to getting your first book printed and keeping that process going?
Yeah, I don't mind saying what that is. So, Where the World is Made, second one, and the green one, that was my first book. I was 41 when it was published. I'm an aged man, but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, say Yeats. The soul clapped its hands and sang, louder sing. And that took 8 years of shopping around, coming close, finalists and so forth, and then finally it hit with the Bakeless Prize. But I happen to know that since they asked me to be a reader for the Bakeless Prize the next year, I got a tub of 100 books from the people submitted to the Bakeless Prize, and I had to pick one out of that tub to be considered by the judge. So you think about that for a second in terms of the path toward publication. I just got lucky. I was sending, it's like playing the lottery in a way. I kept buying my ticket, right, so to speak. So you just have to be persistent. You have to be incredibly persistent. And you have to be persistent and dedicated if you want to do it. And that's the way it is. So after that one, where's the other one? It's not up there. It's called Double Life. And I just was persistent again. It took 5 years to get before the other one, the second one came out, and that was at Louisiana State University Press. Again, they send it out to an outside reader, and I just got the right outside reader who recommended that they do, in fact, take the book. Now, I mean, like I said, the idea is to work really hard so the poems are sharp, they're good poems, you feel confident in the poems. And of course, I was publishing, I was like a business. I made a record of where I sent things out. When I got a rejection, I checked the poems. Did I really do a good job on this poem? Yeah, I did a good job on this poem. And I sent it out again. I did my research about who is the editor. Is this editor going to like my work or not? There are magazines today that won't publish me. No chance. Why? Because I don't write anything like the people that they publish. So why would I send to that magazine? Why would I send to that publisher? The answer is I wouldn't, because I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want to undermine my own emotional sense of worth because they're going to reject me. I know it in advance. So I think learning that over the course of quite a number of years, sending stuff out. It's been sending stuff out for a long time now, 40 years.
In that first book, can you tell us how many were published before the book was published?
Almost everything. That was one thing I did place a burden on myself, which was I wanted most, if not all, of the poems published in some legitimate journal before it actually came into print, which is a pretty heavy burden, but I kept pushing at it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of busy work. It's probably my least favorite thing about, it's about writing, but it's not the same. It's business, right? But you have to do it. That's one of my least favorite. The really least favorite thing is networking. Except this. This I love, like talking with you. But there's other kinds of things that one might want to do to further oneself. But I'd rather get the poems written and get them published and let the poems speak more than me.
And to follow up on that too, just in terms of a number of books, you've been four-way books, and maybe the process of the book, how much editorial input, what do you like about four-way books that you continue to go back to? That
four-way has been really good to me. Where is it? The Narrows. That was the first book that four-way did. And that's the third book of poems. And that is a very chunky book. That's 180 pages because it's really a mural in verse about my family in relation to Ireland and other kind of emigration motifs and like that. So they took that book. I didn't send them to take it. I sent it because I have a friend at Four-Way. I didn't send it into publication, but I wanted their input, editorial input, not for publication, but tell me, do you like this poem? Does this poem work with that? How's the sequence going? The person came back to me and said, Four-Way wants to publish the book. And the reason why I went with Four-Way, obviously, was I knew that very few publishers will publish 180 pages of poetry. In fact, at the time, Louisiana State University Press would be limited to 64 pages. So I wouldn't be able to do the book physically as I wanted to do it. So that's why I went with Four-Way. And thereafter, I just stayed with Four-Way because they do say right of first refusal when you get with the publisher. They get to refuse you first. And then you can send it somewhere else. And they haven't refused me. And I don't want them to, right? So after From Nothing, they gave me a 3-book contract. So okay, good, now I don't have to worry, right? But they could still refuse, but they didn't. And then there would be editorial input at the level of, as you get it to the point of proof galleys for when the book actually comes out. And I think I'm kind of tough about that because I really work the poems over, but I've gotten really good input from editors at Four-Way about changing certain things. It's obviously really helpful to have readers who will be tough on you and push you. But at the same time respect what you're doing. Somebody who's going to be hard on you and doesn't respect what you're doing is also not something you want, right? You want somebody who will be hard on you and respects what you're doing. That combination.
Is that Benton? Who's the cover of the narrative?
That is Thomas Hart Benton.
How did you get Benton on your cover? Okay.
I loved that mural.
Great.
And I saw that mural and I went to them and I said, I really want this mural, a part of it. on the cover. And so I went, and at the time, it was not in the Metropolitan Museum of Art where it is now. At the time, that Benton mural was actually in the AXA building in New York, which is like a bank building, and I got permission to use it, which cost a little bit of money, but it wasn't outrageously expensive. It was like maybe $300, which more money, $300 would have been more than if it were $300 today. It cost more money, but it was reasonable enough, and I loved the cover, and I loved Benton, so I went with it.
Can I ask how you feel about sestinas?
They're really hard to pull off. I think a good sestina is an outstanding. We just talked in my forms class about sestinas last week, and the gold standard is obviously Elizabeth Bishop's sestina, but A Miracle for Breakfast is also a wonderful sestina. Yeah, we looked at a few. There's a sestina by a contemporary African-American woman named Constance Merritt called Mercy Children on the Line, something like that. It's a brilliant sestina, right? So I think they can work, but if they don't work, they really obviously don't work because it's so intricate, right? It's such an intricate form. And the subject matter, the content seems to have to work well, too. Yeah, very hard to write a good sestina, very hard. I have 1.5.
You're talking about your teaching, and some of these students may be interested in Emerson after this, and I wonder if you could talk about your programs
Sure.
there, and what they might, offer for students wanting to continue with their creative writing.
Sure. Well, specifically in terms of creative writing, the Department of Writing, Literature, and Publishing, that's my department, offers a BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts, in creative writing. You tend to focus on a genre at some point, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. And the idea behind that is you will develop a thesis, which is something like a proto-book by the end of your time there. There's also a BA where you still take creative writing classes, but you can inflect it more toward literature and not creative writing, or you can inflect it toward publishing in a way. Then there's a whole other concentration in publishing at the undergraduate level. There's concentration in literature at the undergraduate level, and there's obviously, as I already mentioned, the BFA. So there's a flexibility at the undergraduate level, what you can take. You would all have to take literature courses. You would all have to take some writing courses, creative writing courses, and everybody would have to take one publishing course. In terms of matriculating from MCC to Emerson, what courses would count? I'd have to know the individual before I could figure that one out, but I'm sure it's certainly possible because you're taking courses here.
Yeah,
that sound like you fit.
Students transfer.
Yeah, right. So you're set up really well to come to Emerson. Also, now there's also beyond the BFA or the BA, there's an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and that's possible too. There's also popular fiction MFA now, which is new, mostly online, that one can do. And there's a master's in publishing and writing, which it's mostly inflected toward publishing, but you can take courses, and you do. I have publishing students in my poetry workshops all the time. So I like the permeability myself. I think that's a good thing, but it sort of mostly works that way. Let's see, what else can I say? Yeah.
Can you say more about the publishing in terms of what students' focus tends to be? They're looking towards.
Well, I think we're actually looking for 2 new faculty in publishing this year, and it's book editing. Those lines are book editing. We have faculty who have taught book editing, and we have people who teach magazine publishing. So we have both, and we have digital publishing too. So those would be, the 3 prongs of the publishing portion of the degree. And we've had students who graduated from the MFA who combined with students who graduated in the MA in publishing and started their own presses. So you can look up Rose Metal Press, for example. Rose Metal Press was founded by two of my students at Emerson from the early 2000s, Kathy Rooney and Abby Beckel. And they've done really good work at that press. They're really interested in hybrid genre, and they're really interested in prose poetry. So, other folks have a question?
Well, I think it's a good time to maybe take a break and also make sure.
I have one more question.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Question. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Well, you couldn't. You don't have eyes in the back of your head, thank God. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to pull us all back to your poems, and I'm just going to say, one of the things that I really appreciated about what you shared with us today was the power in the endings of your poems. And so I'm wondering if, while you've been working with poetry, that was something that you consciously aimed for while you were developing your craft.
That's a great question too. I would say I want to land at the end of the poem, maybe not on a crescendo, but if it's a decrescendo, I want it to be resonant. I think it's important that the poem not just end, but resonate in some way, beyond itself, right? Endings that wrap up a bit too neatly annoy me, and I try to avoid that. But poems that just simply stop, I don't want that either. So I kind of listen for what the poem wants to say and try and bring it to what it needs to say. Say it in a way that is a surprise to me, if I can get it there. That's what Frost said, right? No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. That sounds pretty good. Wish I said that.
Think of mechanism in that poem as just, it's about ice maker, not making ice. This last line that just, childless couple.
So that goes to the question about hard things, right? Hard things. You just got to do it, find a way to do it. That's finding an unlikely combination, an ice maker, and not having a kid. So, other folks, thank you.